I would much more prefer if we could do this largely as a conversation. It's late in the day. Y'all are probably as tired as I am and have been going all day. What I do, I'm a reporter. I'm a general assignment reporter largely. I cover a lot of different things. So usually what I do is I ask questions. And I get paid to ask questions, so that's cool. But I find it's much more conversational, and if you guys have anything of particular interest you want to ask about, the topic tonight or the newspaper industry, anything you want, that's all fine by me. It's too many people here, I think, to do this. But what I generally like to do is to go around the room and ask people their names, a bit of their background, and what they're studying, and what their interests are. I think I'll forego that because there are too many people here. But how about as we go along, if you have a question, in the middle of my remarks, if you have a question, that's fine. I'm only going to speak for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up and we can have hopefully a good wide range of discussion. But at any time, just say, hey, Chapman, what do you think of this? Or I think you're full of that, or something like that. I think it would be much more fun for y'all, and it'd be more fun for me too to hear where you guys are coming from and what you think. Because I hope to get something as much out of this, or probably more out of this than y'all will. So, anyways, that said, thank you for that kind welcome. Thank you for inviting me here. Just by way of background, I am Dan Chapman. I am, again, what's considered a general assignment reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I've been there since 2000. I've had a many splendored career since I've been at the paper. Let's see, it's my fourth publication. I started out in Washington, D.C. as a punk reporter at Congressional Quarterly. I then freelanced for a couple of years, mostly in Asia. I went to work for a newspaper in Winston-Salem and then Charlotte, and then I've been here for about 7 years. Let's see, what have I covered here? I've covered, like I said, I've covered quite a bit of things. After 9/11, everything, of course, changed, not only for y'all, but for the news industry in particular. I went up the day after 9/11. I drove to New York City because all airlines were not running at the time, and spent 5 days there covering this stuff until I got a call from y'all go ahead and sit down wherever you want, if there's room. I got a call on a Sunday night, I guess that would have been September 16th or 17th, whatever, from my editor saying, hey, how would you like to go to the Middle East? And I'm like, well, the Middle East of what? No. I'd like to go to Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza and all that. I'm like, sure, that sounds like fun. I wasn't married at the time. I had a dog, which friends thankfully took care of for me. So from New York, I flew back to Washington, to Atlanta. Got my bags together, and the following day, I was in Jerusalem. So I spent about 6 weeks there in Jerusalem and back and forth to the West Bank and Gaza, and that was fascinating. And then I went to Pakistan for 6 weeks, where it was right before the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, and so that was very exciting times and everything. So that was, with this paper, that was my first stint overseas. Since then, I have been, let's see, with this paper, I've been to Latin America, I've been to Europe, and Canada a few times. But all of those subsequent jobs largely were part of my role as kind of economic development and globalization, for which I guess that's the topic I should be speaking this evening, correct? Dr. Rajman? What I do now is, I will not bore you with the great reorganization that my newspaper, like many others, has gone through, but it has been a big period of change, and I am still fortunate enough that I can write stories. I think there's a premium on that these days. I don't know how closely y'all follow the news industry or follow the Atlanta Constitution, but there's a great emphasis on things local these days and on daily hard-breaking news. There are about 35 or 40 of us who are in the so-called and poorly named enterprise department, which largely It gives us the opportunity to write longer and to take more time to, really to report and get to the bottom of issues. Again, I cover mainly economic development. I do a good bit of globalization. I cover the state. A side interest I have now, which fits into all of those categories, is alternative fuels. And I guess that's largely what and who I am. Any questions so far? Okay. I get the topic of what I was going to speak on tonight is globalization comes to Georgia. For many of you, I can see that's not a surprise. How many of you were born outside the country? Is that about a third, maybe? Yeah. What brought you here? Just in general, what brought y'all here? Huh? What? Family, jobs, education, all those? Okay. Well, y'all are a lot more global than I am, and you are also the living embodiment of this so-called globalization comes to Georgia, which I think is very cool, which I think just in general adds a nice flavor to Georgia, which obviously in the Southeast we are behind much of the rest of the country when it comes to globalization. But I think y'all would probably agree that Atlanta itself is probably much further ahead than the rest of the South when it comes to globalization. What is globalization? I'm not going to bore you with that. You've got textbooks, you probably study it. But I think in the context of what I'm talking about, it is the increasing rapidity with which the world comes together, whether it's business or whether it's people. I guess that would be my sort of shorthand definition of what globalization is. The area, Atlanta in particular, largely its globalization has been led by its corporations. No surprise there. Coke, Delta, UPS, Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, of course, is probably the main thing when you talk to business types, CEO types, why they choose Atlanta. If they're coming, say, from Germany or China or Japan or now India, they'll be honest with you, it's things like cheap land and the airport. And the airport, for those of you who travel and or have traveled, is great. You can really get a lot of places from here, whereas in the past you could not. So that's typically on the top of when companies come here to relocate and or when businesses come to set up shop and CEOs come here, one of the first things they invariably mention is the airport and the access. And now, if y'all notice, and of course everybody reads their AJC daily, we now have direct flights to Beijing. Shanghai? Beijing. Beijing, I believe. So that is actually very crucial, will play a huge role in Atlanta's globalization as we move forward. Originally, the companies that came here, that came from the UK, Germany, Holland, and Canada. That was kind of the mode that all southeastern states followed. You would get you'd get a big German pension fund that would come over here, and they would buy up, 200,000 acres of pine trees. So that was an initial large investment. From that, you would get. The Brits would come over here and they'd buy a tower in Buckhead. So that was kind of the traditional stuff. What really triggered Atlanta's, ascendance onto the international scene, does anybody have an idea what happened within the last 10 or 12 years that really put Atlanta on the map? Thank you. It was indeed the Olympics. And I was not here at the time. I was in Charlotte. But just the spillover effect was phenomenal. Everybody all of a sudden mentioned Atlanta in the same breath as London, Hong Kong, you name it. It was all of a sudden considered, at least for those 2 weeks or whatever, truly an international and global city. And the city and the city in particular, has benefited greatly from that sort of name association. In further luring businesses and attracting folks from overseas. There were a couple of people who deserve a lot of credit for further putting Atlanta on the global map. One was the governor before my time, before y'all's time, Governor Busby. He was, he was kind of foresighted and one of those sort of visionaries, one of those seers who realized during his administration back in the 70s, and I hope I'm correct on that the way to go is, the future was overseas. It was no longer good enough just to make a product that in Georgia that you would sell to California, you would sell maybe to Canada. He was the one that really originated this, or helped to originate this what is known as Seuss Japan. Excuse me. And that's the Southeast U.S. Japan. It's an annual gathering of leaders, business, political leaders from the southeastern states and their Japanese counterparts. Japanese investment now is huge, largely as a result of that. There are something like 341 Japanese companies in Georgia alone, which is, if not the top, they're number 2 or 3 in the amount of foreign investment here in Georgia. This week, as we speak, the governor and a whole coterie of state officials and business leaders are in Japan for the annual conference. And now it also includes Korea, South Korea. So it's Seuss Japan, Korea, and after they're in Tokyo, they'll head on over to Korea for a few days. Mainly they go there and they drop in on companies and try and get them to come here or expand to do business here. I expect to be talking to the governor tomorrow about his trip, so if y'all have any questions you'd like me to ask him, feel free to drop a note and I will do that. Today I will not bore you with statistics, but a couple jump to mind. The last fiscal year, Georgia attracted $5.8 billion in foreign and domestic investment, resulting in 24,000 jobs. That's according to the State Economic Development Department. Foreign investment accounted for 15% of all those jobs. A pretty goodly sum, 15% of that chunk of money and those jobs. Exports, the other, I guess, sort of gauge for globalization. Through the state of Georgia, companies exported $20.5 billion worth of goods and services, and that's up from, that was in 2005, and that was up from $16.3 billion just 3 years earlier. So you can see that there's, it's growing in importance, and it will only keep growing in importance. Exports as well as investment, foreign direct investment in this country. And I'll get to that in a second. Let's see, what do we have? We have, I mean, that's the traditional stuff, and I was talking about this when they would come here, what they would buy, the buildings, they'd set up a chemical plant, or they'd buy a Buckhead Tower, or, what we would ship. I think y'all be surprised, our #1 export still, even though we are very global. Can anybody even hazard a guess what our #1 export from Georgia overseas is? What? Peaches, that's a good guess. You're in the right ballpark. Huh? Peanuts, close. Close. Mud. When I put it that way, that's the reaction you get. It's actually kaolin. Kaolin is a chalky, not really mud, but it's a substance that's used in all sorts of paper products and other products. Middle Georgia produces quite a bit of it, and it's our top export earner, which doesn't sound like we have a very high-tech nor global economy when you consider that, and then followed up closely by a bunch of agricultural goods. And this is just now Georgia proper, what we export. If you look at what goes through the Port of Savannah and or the Port of Brunswick, which are our 2 major export portals, you get things like machinery, you get cars, just anything that's about produced in the whole southeast of the U.S. will go through there. And whereas Atlanta is indeed the hub for globalization here in Georgia, you cannot discount the importance of Savannah, which, and again, I won't bore you with stats, is responsible for just immeasurable amounts of jobs, dollars, and investment in Georgia too. So now, we've had the traditional stuff. Now, if you talk to the economic development types, if you talk to the governor, if you talk to Ken Stewart, who's head of the Georgia Department of Economic Development, or Sam Williams, the head of the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, they're all sure as the sunshine that we're now on the cusp of a new high-tech Georgia. That the life sciences, that electronics, that you name it. Anything that takes a brain, and that's where I'm assuming y'all come in, is going to replace brawn, i.e. mud, i.e. peanuts, i.e. cotton, you name it. So that's the way of the future. You know, we got to get all these high-tech industries here so that we can not only have great jobs for y'all, but so that we can also export these high-tech products that will make a lot of money and carry us fully through the 21st century. There have been some successes of late. I write a lot, and I am not necessarily a critical person, but when you have elected officials, you must keep them accountable, correct? So I write often about what the governor is or is not doing when it comes to whether economic development or international trade. But I do tip my cap to him here, and I'll come back in a minute or two and not tip my cap to him. But there have been a few successes of late, which really are kind of interesting and fascinating, and really portend good things for the future. And this is in the area of recruitment of non-traditional type businesses to Georgia. For example, a company I wrote about not too long ago, or last week, the week before, is called Chinamex. Chinamex is unlike anything I have ever seen before. It is a Chinese, i.e. mainland, communist China company. Communist China now has the okay to go overseas. The government says go forth and prosper, make us a lot of money, so that we don't have to change our political system, but perhaps that's for a different argument, for a different day. But they're very big on making money. So they encourage smart, entrepreneurial Chinese to go overseas and set up shop. This thing, Chinamex, is fascinating in that they refer to it as a quote-unquote trade platform. They will come here, they will set up somewhere in downtown Atlanta, I haven't quite learned where yet, a big building where it'll be kind of like a free trade zone / business incubator. Again, with the blessing of the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, they will encourage dozens, eventually hundreds of small Chinese companies to come here to learn the lay of the land, to build their business from scratch here in the United States. First, there may be 2 or 3 people per company. They may be selling, they may be making, I don't know, something that would go into a circuit board. They may be making, they may be trying to perfect some sort of engineering capability, and they'll be working hand in hand with Georgia Tech or perhaps Clayton State. But the thing is, it's an incubator where they will come here and get the expertise to not only develop their product, but also to market it in the United States. They're talking eventually of about 4,000 jobs, and I guess the upper end goals would be having factories ringing Atlanta, or at least across Georgia, many Chinese factories. They have a similar thing in Dubai and another one in Amsterdam. And so just by virtue of those, their factories, or their platforms, as it were, being in those countries, Georgia and Atlanta officials say, wow, we are really, truly global. Another one which I find interesting I wrote about was a company called Mahindra Motors. Anybody have any idea who they are? Yep, who said that? Okay. What do they make?
So it sounds like motorcycle parts or parts for cars.
I think initially and I'm not quite sure where I put in the story, but I've since forgotten, in India they did start out doing that. But now they are coming here, and it's a joint venture, I believe, with American money backing it also. They want to make SUVs. So they hope that within 5 years we will all be driving Indian-made SUVs. They're already in Europe. They're nice cars. I saw them out at in Alpharetta, where they have their sales office, and they will go for about half the price. So that's, I thought, was fascinating. One of the more interesting ones is a company called, and correct, is it Wipro? Wipro. And what do?
I'm not familiar.
They do everything. They're huge, man. They're basically telecommunications, but they're also back office. A lot of times when you pick up the phone and you call on your credit card, or you have, some sort of, anything telephony related problem, a lot of times people in India will pick up. Criticism of that has been that, a lot of the jobs that were once American quote-unquote back office jobs in a bank, if you handled credit cards, or in an insurance company, or even things as drafting of architectural diagrams. And scariest of most, at least to me, is that they're thinking of outsourcing journalism. which they know that I make very little money, but they can do it probably for half of what I make in India. Well, this is a company that does a lot of that so-called outsourcing. Now they are coming here, and a few months ago, they said they're going to set up a company here to do, let's see, 500 to 1,000 jobs next few years. Software developers and engineers. I mean, this is fascinating if you think about it. It's still an ongoing argument now that we are losing jobs. You know, you turn on Lou Dobbs and he'll rant and rave, you know, and get all up in the tizzy and bloated and start foaming at the mouth, and you want to change the channel. But he has tapped the nerve in this country that all of our jobs are going overseas. First, it was what kind of jobs that went overseas? Right, textile. Used to be a huge textile state. Those disappeared. Now it's globalization. What came next? These type jobs. These white-collar jobs were outsourced. China got some, India got most, and now you're seeing other countries, because India is getting a bit expensive for this sort of work, including the Philippines, where English is very good. A lot of the Spanish-speaking jobs have been outsourced to, I don't know where in Latin America, but I know they have been. So what we have here is these jobs that are being outsourced are now coming back here. So I mean, that is, if anything says globalization and how you do not need that boundaries don't matter, that borders don't matter, that you can put any kind of job anywhere, well, that pretty much says it. And it's fascinating on the one hand, but it also potentially, like everything, and I won't bore you with the economics of destruction, because I don't know them in the first place, it will cause some pain. Now, you would think if an Indian company were coming here, the pain would be in India. There may be a little bit of pain from losing 1,000 of these jobs, but believe me, there are tens of thousands of other kids out there who want to fill those jobs and will have the opportunity. The fear here is, remember, globalization is one big circle. It's spinning faster and faster. You can't get off. When these jobs come here, it is likely to further displace American jobs. Well, how can that be? I mean, they're bringing jobs here. These are great jobs. These are going to be good, well-paying white-collar jobs. Well, the thinking behind what this company is going to be doing is going to be like, I'm a salesman for Wipro. I'm going to go to company ABC here in Alpharetta or Mora or whatnot and say, hey, what you're doing, I can do cheaper. You know, and so some look at it as kind of the camel with the nose under the tent, or what's it, the elephant in the room, or whatever sort of etymological anthropomorphic. Is that it? Thank you. Anthropomorphic connection you can make. Thank you. But they're going to come here and they're just further going to be able to suck away American jobs and take these new jobs back to India. I don't know if that's necessarily, yes ma'am?
But wouldn't you think that with all the stuff that's going on in the news now where they're saying, like Walmart, for example, and all the products made in China and everything's being recalled and all this stuff like that, what do you think with people trying to cut costs, in the long run, it's costing them more? So
that's an excellent. I mean, you really cannot have this discussion without talking about Walmart. You know, good, bad, and different. My wife hates Walmart. You know, I remind her, I'm not a huge fan of it because I see the damage that it has done to small towns. I see the damage that it has done to wages. I see the damage that it has done, you know, to families and lives and whatnot. That said, Walmart is saving you a lot of money. Not only if you shop there, and I shop there, don't tell my wife, but I shop there. But because they have such low prices, they force Target, Kmart, Sears, everybody else to lower their prices. There's a wonderful statistic, and I hope I get it right, that trade, international trade, saves the average American consuming family about $4,000 a year. Because prices are so low, largely that's the China factor. The flip side to that again though, and you know, if there's one thing I've learned, and I'm sure y'all are learning this too, is there are no direct, simple answers when it comes to globalization. Yes, Walmart has cost jobs, but yes, Walmart's putting money back in my pocket. Walmart is also adding jobs, particularly in Georgia. Our port in Savannah is the fastest growing port in the United States. It is the second largest port on the East Coast. It is the fourth or fifth largest in the United States, all because of China. China, they go through the Panama Canal, they put it in here, and there are tens of millions of warehouse feet space in near Savannah. Walmart has one, or actually two, huge warehouses there. So if I were to guess, I would say probably fully 30 to 40% of the trade that comes through Savannah, we're talking dollars and jobs again, is China related, and a good chunk of that is Walmart. So again, you cannot dismiss on the one hand bad for the economy, or on the other hand say it's good for the economy. But that's a great example. Let's see. Okay, so then there was any other questions, please? Okay, I'm trying to wrap this up here. I'm already talking too long. I apologize for that. There were other things that Georgia has done, and again, I'm talking mainly about a public policy angle perspective here. There was something that the state tried to lure called the Free Trade Area of the Americas. Anybody know what that is or was?
No.
It was back up until about last year, there was this notion, and it's still alive, that like NAFTA, as Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, there would be an Americas wide, from Chile all the way up to the North Pole, one big common economic union, kind of like the European Union in Europe, but also kind of like the way I referred to it and every other cliched reporter referred to it was NAFTA on steroids. It needed a headquarters, and so Atlanta, it was a long shot, but they raised about $4 million. It was largely run by the Metro Atlanta Chamber. They got a lot of money from the legislature and from businesses, which is another thing that Atlanta does very well. It's got a very active business community which will put up money for these sorts of things. And they spent about 3 years trying to lure the headquarters for this free trade group. It didn't work, but to no fault of the state officials for trying, since there was never this FTAA, this trade agreement linking all these countries together, there was no need for a headquarters. But I think, and it would be easy to say that, oh, this was a failure. We wasted $4 million. We didn't get this headquarters. But that's not really true, because what they did do, and I believe this even though I guess I've written critically about it at times, is that it raised Atlanta's international profile primarily across Latin America. Dozens of trips. Shirley Franklin went on probably a half dozen trips, meeting up with presidents, ministers, vice presidents, vice ministers across the Caribbean and across Latin America. The governor went on a couple of trips, but the team they put together to do this went on literally dozens of trips, and it got Atlanta's name out there, and they are seeing rewards from that, although this headquarters did not come to fruition. So I think that's something which really also helped put Atlanta on the map. There's another thing, and I spent way too much time covering this, the G8, y'all know what that is? What's the G8? Who's in the G8? The G8 is the world's, well, no, it's the U.S., most of the European powers. Russia is a member. They're, of course, a new and upcoming power. It's kind of like the old boy network of economic powers in the world gather annually, they think, to try and solve the world's problems. The G8 conference is held each year. There's a rotating leadership of it. And this year, I guess it was in Russia. A few years ago, it was in Georgia. I mean, it was the United States was the sponsor of the thing, and Sonny Perdue, not really Perdue, but others succeeded in getting it down to St. Simon's, which was a big coup. For about 3 or 4 days, again, Georgia was beamed around the world. Nothing much really happens at these things, a lot of photo ops, but it's a pretty place to have your picture taken. But anyway, that shows that was another effort successful to get Georgia's face out there in the globalized world. Other things which the state has going for it, the university system is getting much better at establishing international contacts. And are most of y'all undergrads? Mm-hmm. Any of you have plans to study overseas? No? One? I would, this is where I'll get on my pulpit here and say every one of you should spend at least a semester overseas. Okay, that's enough of my proselytizing for the evening, but you will find it's invaluable, and again, the world is so small, it will just shrink that much more. But the university system is really pushing it, not only with students studying abroad, but also with their research and with companies that come here, but also they're establishing. Georgia Tech, I think, has a campus, or will soon have a campus in Beijing. I know the University of Georgia in Athens does either classes or has full programs in China. But all of these sorts of things are growing in importance and stature, and they will prove invaluable in the long run. Yes, sir?
Clayton is doing it.
Good. Where?
Germany, Italy, India.
Oh, good. Very good.
Some of our professors are going out of the country.
Where are you going?
India,
Good.
Mumbai.
When? Next semester?
right after Thanksgiving, actually.
For a couple of weeks, or?
About 2.5 weeks.
Oh, that's wonderful. Are you taking students with you, or is it just a
No.
learning?
No, but we do have a study abroad trip. Some students may not know about it yet, to India next summer.
That would, I would encourage all of y'all, if you can come up with the money. I assume they're going to need money to do it.
Yes. Lots of it.
We'll work that extra job, whatever it takes. But I mean, you even have now, you have kids, and I've seen these stories. You'll get Ivy League graduates, who will go to India and work for Wipro. It's like, well, why? I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling to me. Why would somebody with an Ivy League education go work at $20,000 US a year for an Indian outsourcing company? Because they're smart. You learn from the people who do things well, and you take that knowledge, and either these kids are going to come back here and set up something similar, or else they've already got the global connections. They already have the ease in working and just being overseas. All of that will prove invaluable for them as they further their careers. Let's see, other things we have now, really an interesting and thick layer of lawyers and bankers, not so thick on the venture capitalist side, but others of sort of what I guess I would refer to as kind of that mid-tier professional. I mean, their salaries, of course, are mid-tier, but they're not, at the top at the political or a CEO level. But these are the ones that really make the deals work, that really grease the wheels. For example, in all the Chinese companies, and there have been 3 or 4 that have announced manufacturing plants here over the last 6 months. And interestingly enough, all of them are coming to south of Atlanta. They're not going up to North Atlanta. They're coming to south of Atlanta because land prices are relatively cheaper here, especially versus northern Georgia, or further northern Georgia, in proximity to the airport. So you'll probably be seeing, there's one in Peachtree City, Samy, S-A-M-Y. Where is, the other one's going to over towards, shoot, I can't remember. Anyways, they happen to like South Atlanta. What else? Mayor Franklin gets props because she's very active in her travels. She's been to China once, twice, maybe 3 times. She's been to Europe, she's been all over the place. I suppose criticism would be she's trying to figure out what she does next because she's term limited from running again. But I will not write that story because I think she's doing exactly the right thing, traveling the world and stamping Atlanta and Georgia on the global consciousness. What else do we have? Okay, so now what we're seeing, and I just wanted to run through quickly, those companies that are here. I also wanted to mention that, and this is, I swear I won't bore you with statistics, but no, I won't bore you with that one. It's not just Georgia. I want to emphasize, it's not just Atlanta. I mean, I have this problem as a reporter, and it's a dangerous thing to have. If y'all live in the area, you probably have it too, that everything in Georgia is Atlanta-centric. That, we are the be-all, we are the end-all, and oh, South Georgia, pooh. Well, some of you may be from South Georgia, and I spend actually a lot of time in South Georgia. I travel a lot doing stories. This morning I was up in North Georgia, in Dalton and Rome, but there are some very good examples and surprising examples, I think, of how globalization has kind of instilled itself into rural America and rural Georgia. For example, and reporters always give examples, which hopefully leavens the atmosphere. I spent before the G8. I spent 6 weeks in Vidalia. Y'all know what Vidalia is known for, right? Where did you? What did he say? Well, it does also known for cotton too, which was another year of my life I'll tell you about. But I spent 6 weeks in Vidalia before the G8 because I wanted to explain, like I guess I'm trying to do now, globalization. And I didn't want to do it in Atlanta because it's just so diffuse here. It's really a part of everyday life. So I wanted to go to a small town. It's not that small, but I wanted to go to a smaller town and to really kind of make it come home. So there were like 3 things I focused on there after I spent some time and figured it out. One was a guy who makes, he used to make like bags that we would all carry around with us. And now, because war was such a big thing, war is a very global thing, he was making bags for the military. Another was a Mexican immigrant who came here, worked his tail off, and now he owns a Japanese restaurant. It wasn't that bad either. And the third thing, though, and this is what I had a lot of time on, was with the Vidalia onion. Where do you think this is a trick question. Where do you think Vidalia onions are grown? Very
We have a
good.
special soil in Vidalia, Georgia.
There you go. Somebody's from Vidalia, huh?
Now I am from that little hometown where you talk about the glue, the barley, the wheat, and the rye.
And
I'm
that
from
is?
Perry, Georgia.
Perry. Oh, okay.
Yes,
Do you know the governor?
yes.
Okay. Are you going to tell him I was talking bad about him?
No, but tell him the Whitfield say hello.
I'll talk to him in the morning. I'll tell him that. But yes, a lot of the Vidalia onions, of course, are grown in that lovely soil down there. But what fascinated me is that, we want to eat our Vidalia onions year-round. And how's the only way we can do that? Globalization. They grow, and I don't have the numbers down, but probably more than half of the Vidalia onions are not grown in Vidalia. They're grown in Peru, they're grown in Mexico, they're grown in about 2 or 3 other Latin American countries. And you would say, well, then they're not Vidalia onions, are they? Well, they are, and through the wizardry of marketing, they grow them down there under very close, watchful eyes. Ship them up here through the Panama Canal, through the port of Savannah, make sure they go through all the quality controls in Vidalia, stamp them as not grown in Vidalia, but as approved by, or something like that. So I'm hoping maybe next year to go down to Peru and do that story. And somebody, you had also, I think, mentioned about, what with our food being grown overseas, and is it safe, and is it scary?
Everything is coming back contaminated.
Right, and that's actually the story I want to do. Because so much of our food, and Lord knows to what percentage, but it comes from overseas. So I think that's really cool. You think Vidalia, no offense, sleepy little bucolic Vidalia, but it's really a global place. And that I think is kind of interesting. As I said, I was in Dalton this morning. Another aspect of globalization you see every day is illegal immigrants, largely Mexican. Dalton's economy would die without globalization, without immigrants. It's already hurting because of the housing downturn and this drought that we are in. But, you don't have to look far to see yet again the impact of globalization. Let me just, a couple other things here. We've done a lot of good here in Georgia. We've also done some not so good. We are still too much in the thrall, too much under the control. Is that my phone? Of agriculture. I won't go into the WTO. I won't go into the whole cotton dispute. I spent a year, last year, all I did was write about cotton. I did a project on cotton subsidies. And before you fall asleep thinking about cotton subsidies, the angle was how we give billions of dollars every year to a relatively small number of farmers, some of them in Vidalia, many of them in Perry, including the governor, who gets subsidies. And these are all the big guys. They squeeze out the little guys. That's what they do hurtfully in the United States, more hurtfully overseas, because they get these subsidies, they overproduce, that lowers the world price, they dump it on the world market. West African farmers, in particular in Mali, where I went and spent about 2 weeks researching this story, are dying. So again, you think that, well, we need to feed the world, we can do it most efficiently. That's not true. But we also have to realize, whether it's cotton, whether it's Walmart, whether it's something else, that what we do here, you may think it's innocuous, you may think that it doesn't impact the world, has a very, very serious and oftentimes deleterious effect on people around the world, usually poor people struggling to get by on $1 or $2 a day. So the ag industry is too protectionist, as are our shrimpers and our textiles, even though they're all disappearing. I also, and this is my only criticism really of the governor, is that he's not a traveler. Shirley travels more than he does. Andy Young, all he did was travel. But in this day and age, governors' roles really are nothing more, they're a little more than salesmen, They're the ones who seal the deals. They're the ones who say, hey, I can cut you the deal on the water, the electricity rates of the land or whatnot. And our governor refuses to go to China. I've done this story, I'm tired of doing this story, It's like he says he's going to China, he doesn't go to China. This week he's in Korea and Japan, and last I looked on a map, they're right next door. He won't go to China. And I don't know if any of you have much familiarity with the Chinese, but one thing in business and in politics there that is very much prized is the face-to-face, especially with the top political leadership. And so I think he's doing a great disservice to the state by not taking the time to go to China. I went with Sonny when he went to Germany. It was his first overseas trip as governor. And I think only the second time in his life he'd been out of the country. This is the governor here. And I went to Germany with him and England, and he was kind of a fish out of water. He's gotten better, of course, but that really kind of stuck in my mind, like, hey, you're supposed to be the international salesman for the state. You should be doing a better job. That's the final editorial comment I will make. And then we're still a low-wage state. And then that's really all I want to say about that. Now, thank you. I would love to hear what you all think, and I would love to make our remaining time together more a discussion than me blabbering on. So please. Does anybody have any thoughts, any comments, any questions? Tell me I'm wrong. Yes, ma'am.
Out of all the places that you've been, in your opinion, what's the most globalized?
In the world, what is the most global?
I mean, out of the places that you've been.
It's probably, these nation states like Hong Kong and Dubai. To me, Hong Kong has always been, I think, one of the most, and Singapore, have always been some of the most global places in the world, just because it is such a melting pot of people. Of course, New York City, and London, of course, and Paris. London only in the last really 20 years, though. But what's really struck me are when the term nation state is they're just basically cities. They have no natural resources. The only way they make it and survive is by talent, brains, communications, shipping, things that are very global in nature. So, I would now add Dubai to that mix because they're making the city out of whole cloth. And it's a very international city. I think, interestingly, though, what we're seeing, and I love this, is we're seeing the so-called second-tier countries. And I don't use that pejoratively. I just haven't come up with a better term for it. Brazil, South Africa, China is really in a grouping all unto itself. But you're seeing them trading with each other a lot more. You're seeing them basically saying, hey, screw you, United States, screw you, Europe. We can do our own trade between us and get rich that way. And they're doing it, and they're doing it very successfully. And I think, although I'm an American, I think that is very encouraging for, world commerce and world development. So they're not at that level of being major, globalized communities, but they're getting there. Ma'am.
Will you do an article on the globalization and the price of farmland, because very few colleges these days teach agricultural.
Right.
And born and raised in the country, about 20 years ago, a German company came to Perry, Georgia, and bought, an American in Perry, Georgia can't compete with a German company who can pay $15,000 for an acre of
Right,
land and
right.
purchase 3,000 to 15,000 acres,
Right.
which is forcing out the small farmers.
Right, you're absolutely right.
And as a farmer and as a farming family, I am deeply concerned about that.
God, I don't know where to take that one. It's like globalization, there's so many angles to that. It's not just the German company or the Japanese company coming in. Because of our tax laws, Florida farmers can sell their land to developers to build a strip mall, as long as within 6 months they turn around and plow that money into land elsewhere, there are no taxes. Well, where do you think they're coming? They're coming to Perry. They're coming to South Georgia, Central Georgia. So it's not just globalization that is doing that. It's across the map. It's everybody. I think it also raises another and more provocative question. Did I do that?
No.
And this one I'm sure you'll chew my head off of over. It's like, why should I care about small farmers? Well, let me finish here. Yes, they're the backbone of our country, and yes, we have this idyllic and mythic notion of the small yeoman farmer tilling his land from sunup to sundown to eke out a living. I can get that same product for half the cost from, West Africa, from Central America. So why should I be subsidizing you, in effect?
Well, we're not a small farmer. We're the largest black farmers on the face of the earth. And I say that with pride because
Sure.
I am proud. These are my in-laws.
Right.
And in the 80s, they were farming 50,000 acres of land, although they did not own it.
Right.
Okay, but they do own about between 12 and 15,000 acres, but they won't tell Sam that in terms of revenue service.
What's your name again?
Whitfield. And the governor is indeed a very good friend of my in-laws, and we think very highly of him. But as we age, we have worked since the 50s, and my parents and grandfathers before the 50s to build this empire. And to think that in another generation or 2 generations it will not exist, it is bothersome.
Oh no, I agree. I'm playing devil's advocate because when I did spend this whole year writing about cotton subsidies, I was down Seminole County largely, in and around Bainbridge over there too.
Yes.
One of the stories I did, and I really liked doing, was the demise of the small farm and the demise of the little guy farmer, black and white. And you know, where your argument need be is with Washington. Because as I talked about, well, and you know that, but as I talked about subsidies, these subsidies for cotton in particular, well, the big guys get them. That means they get all the money. That means they're going to buy your land next door to you.
Yeah.
And they're going to put the little guy out of business, and they're going to get bigger. So, it sounds like your family is of such a size that they'll be around for at least another generation. But little guys and young guys, they can forget it. So. Yes, ma'am.
I know that you mentioned alternative fuels before. What do you think about this issue that we're so dependent on, like Iraq and Saudi Arabia, those countries for oil, when there's oil like in Russia and other countries that probably is maybe more than what's over in the Middle East?
I don't think it's really. We're basically, we drink so much oil, it's sickening, and we try to get it wherever we can. If we could get it from Russia, we would, and we do. If we could get it from, anywhere else, we will, and we try. So it's not like we cannot buy Russian oil, it's just that Russia chooses who they want to sell it to. as for alternative fuels, I mean, that would be, you know, again, it's kind of a, wow, it sounds perfect on the surface. Let's just go out and put every acre we have under corn, and let's turn it all into ethanol, and, you know, to hell with the Middle East and the wars that we engender there because of our insatiable demand for oil. But it's not that easy, of course, you know, and it's not that cost effective. In fact, the whole rush to corn ethanol actually uses to produce a gallon of corn ethanol, you use about 1.3 gallons of other fuels. So you're not really, you know, you're not solving your oil dependency nor your problems, nor is it going to get you out of any future wars. So I've read a bunch of these stories, but you know, corn ethanol, we now have about a half dozen plants, either soon to operate or on the books, is not the answer. A discussion for another day, though, is cellulosic, i.e. pine trees, of which Georgia has quite a few, 24 million acres, is a much more likely and fruitful alternative energy source. They just need to perfect the technology. Yes, ma'am.
We're going to let somebody come in and build an SUV factory.
Isn't that cool? Well,
my students know I just have a real problem with that.
Why?
Well, we have 4% of the world's population. We consume 25% of the world's production of oil. Okay, my statistic for the day. And it's, you know, we're just going to make it worse. And we had that little blip where the price of oil went down, the price of gasoline at the pump went down earlier in the year. SUV sales spiked that month. And it's like, are we not getting the picture here, guys?
Well, you know, maybe
that's me on my
maybe they won't build it. Maybe it will be, you know, education, what have you, that there won't be a market for it. I mean, you and I can sit here and go, SUVs are bad until we're blue in the face, but if the market is there, we're going to build them. Yes, sir.
I have one other quick question. I think it's about time to close.
Oh.
What do you think about drilling for oil in Alaska and other areas where environmentalists and others have suggested?
Well, I mean, because, and I have not written about it, I'm not very up on it, but what little I do know about it is it would only add, Alaska, would only add a drop to all of our needs. I'm pretty pro-environment. I don't think that, you know, so that we can drive these SUVs, we need to further despoil, you know, one of the most pristine and beautiful places, especially where there are other means of getting energy. If we would just, you know, have the political, how do I put this politely, will to do it. You know, so I guess I'm opposed to it.
Thank you.
Well, let's thank you, Jim, for coming. We're out of time. A gift for Mr. Chapman, dinner for two.
Oh, love that.
Thank you on behalf of Seattle.
Thank you. If anybody wants to talk, I'll be around if you're not too tired.